Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my co-host, Maricella, Herrera. Maricella, how is your marathon training going? Or half marathon?
Slow. It's so cold. I don't like running when it's cold, but it's something that gets me outside. So I'll say it's going well.
And silver lining during this time is that you can block off time and go for runs in the middle of the day or in the afternoon. So it's not, even colder or darker when you get home. So that's good, right?
Yeah, honestly, the flexibility of both, we've always had a pretty flexible culture at Ellevate where we can do with our time what we see fit, but also working from home, which makes me be very close to the park, makes it a lot better for me to be able to take a running break in the middle of the day or in the afternoon before it gets dark. So actually, I'm after we finish this, I am going to go for my run for today.
Yay! I will not. I will go and sit on the couch and try and get through some emails, but I will be thinking about you and your run. But I'm curious. I mean, how does that impact your productivity or your problem solving, your creativity? I mean, taking that time out in the middle of the day, and we oftentimes are like meeting to meeting and a lot of intense work. But do you find afterwards that you're energized, refreshed, that it gives you the space to kind of work through some of the things that we've been tackling during the day? I mean, what is the impact, if anything?
It's very, very helpful. Honestly, like being able to step away from the computer for a while, and for me, running is my me time. Like I will put my headphones in and either listen to music or listen to a podcast and just be kind of in my world. And it is so helpful. Like when I get back to work, and you know me too, my schedules are kind of shifted lately with working from home. I'm not a morning person. I find myself being much more productive in the evenings. So it does re-energize me for like tackling different problems, especially like go for a run, come back, take a nice warm shower to defrost, and then it's kind of getting back to work with like fresh eyes.
Well, that reminds me, we haven't had worky hour in a while.
We have not. Yes, worky hour is something we started doing where we would have drinks and talk about work in a more informal setting while virtually on Zoom. And I think honestly, to me, it was a lifeline throughout like the first few months of the pandemic. We used to do it once a week, so we have to bring it back.
Yeah, I loved it. I really did. We definitely have to bring that back. It's fun to, I think, we're just more creative time and social time, which is missing when you're not in an office. I'm wondering, Maricella, did you know that I was asked to speak at Raise Her Voice on March 11th?
I did not.
Yes. Yeah. Nikki, our lovely Nikki, asked if I would open it up with a story of my own, which we're going to have to talk about because I'm like, I don't know what to say. I mean, I think always when we're invited to do this, the initial reaction is, oh, I don't have anything to say. I don't have anything to share. But I know we all do. So many of us have stories and experiences that it's important we talk about it. We talk about the impacts of our careers and our lives, and Raise Her Voice is something that's really important to Ellevate and the Ellevate community, to our mission of amplifying diverse voices and creating change in business and in the world. It's a movement where throughout all of the globe, we had women who nominated themselves or someone else to share their voice. And then we had a voting process where we now will be hosting virtual events globally where we're raising her voice and amplifying these stories. So I really hope that our listeners will join us. We do have one on March 11th. You can learn all about it at ellevatenetwork.com, where I'll be sharing my story alongside a number of amazing women who are going to be helping us connect with their experiences of being a woman in the workplace.
I love our Raise Her Voice campaign. It's really, I mean, it's the second year we do it. We do it in honor of International Women's Day and Women's History Month. So we'll have events throughout March. Obviously, this year they will be on Zoom, and they're actually by region too. So there'll be storytellers in different regions and hosted by our different chapters, which is really great to see the different stories from people all over the world. So I really love it. I'm very excited for it. I did not know you were going to speak. That's really cool. And I'm sure you have great stories to tell, as we all do. So
absolutely. So I'm excited about it. And I'm also excited about our guests today. One of our guests, Tammy Tibbetts, is a repeat guest on the show, and she is joined by her partner in She's the First, which is the business that they created together. Her partner, Christen Brandt. And they're here to talk about a book that they recently wrote focused on creating impact. It's a step-by-step plan to create the world you want to live in. And, you know, as we've been talking in this initial conversation with Maricella, it's about, you know, the impact of sharing stories, the impact of the work we do, the impact of, you know, being able to go out for a run in the middle of the day. And it may seem small, but it's all of these small steps that lead to the great change in, you know, business culture, in the world. What are the things you care about, and how can you really be intentional about impacting that conversation and really doing something? So the conversation with Tammy and Christen was, you know, important for me, and I think for many of us here that are listening to this podcast, because oftentimes you can feel kind of stuck. You know, what can I do? One person, or there's so much that needs to be done. How do you even get started? And they share a lot of great insights for how to overcome that and to just take steps every day.
I'm sure this is going to be great. I haven't talked to Tammy in a while. She was one of the first people I met when I started working at Ellevate a long time ago. But the work that She's the First is doing is amazing. They have really had an impact with girls and women being the first in their families to go to college, and it's inspiring. So I'm very much looking forward to the conversation.
Well, let's get to it. Tammy and Christen, it is a great honor to have you here, Tammy, for the second time. So welcome to today's podcast.
Thanks for having us.
I want to start, as we often do, getting a little bit more information on you, who you are, what brought you to where we are today, a little bit more about your passion and work, because that will help us set the stage for the big part of our conversation, which is around the new book you just came out with called Impact, a step-by-step plan to create the world you want to live in. I'm incredibly passionate about this, as many of our listeners know. But let's start off first with learning a little bit more about you. Christen, do you want to start and just share, you know, the journey you took to get to where you are today?
I would love to. So I originally met Tammy actually through a scholarship program. And I was about to head off to college, and Tammy was still in college. We were really young. And at that time, we connected on Facebook. And then that was it. We didn't talk for a while. But the next time we touched base was because Tammy had posted on Facebook about an idea that she had to create a media campaign around girls' education and girls' rights. And at the time, I was at Syracuse University and I was studying journalism, but I was spending a lot of my time researching issues that impacted women and girls. I grew up in a household with my grandparents, surrounded by aunts and my mom, so the power of women was always something that really resonated with me. So when Tammy posted about this idea she had for a media campaign, she had like a rallying cry there. And I immediately messaged her. And as it turns out, I was the only one to message her. And so from that day on, we started an organization called She's the First. And the original idea really wasn't to start an international nonprofit. It really was just going to be a media campaign. But over the course of the 3 years that followed, we really just started getting to know our local partners around the world and better understanding the issues impacting girls on a global scale, so that by 2012, we were both ready to leave the magazine industry and pursue She's the First full time. And we've been doing that now since 2012.
That's great. And Tammy, what was your journey to get to She's the First? And can you share a little bit more about where the organization is today and the type of impact you're having?
Yeah, so I'm Tammy, Christen's co-founder and CEO of She's the First. And Christen and I, we actually both have journalism backgrounds. That's what we went to college for, first in our families to go to college. And I think that when we graduated and we thought we landed our dream jobs in the magazine industry, on the side, we had this passion for using our social networks. And that was in 2009. So I'm sure listeners will remember how innovative a time that was, when we could stay connected with all of our friends from school, and every single person that we met, we would add to our Facebook networks. And we saw an opportunity there to inform people of the issues that girls face around the world. The fact that there are 130 million girls out of school. And people, when they hear that, they want to do something, but they don't know how. There's not an easy entry point. So when we started She's the First, we had that goal in mind, to not only be an organization that is fighting for girls' rights and working with local partner organizations to ensure that they can access the services and the opportunities that they deserve, but what can each and every one of us do to be part of that kind of a movement? So today, She's the First is working with local organizations across 11 different countries in East and West Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. Our advocacy efforts are truly global and encompass the United States as well. We have over 200 high school and college campus chapters of girls themselves leading this work to make sure that people understand what their rights are and how to respect them. A couple years ago, we launched the Global Girls Bill of Rights, which girls themselves contributed to, and you can find online. And that's kind of our big goal, is that, while we're making a very focused impact on 130,000 girls that She's the First is reaching through our programs, our advocacy really does have infinite power and continues to grow every month and every year.
Well, and I'm interested in what you're seeing over the past year. Specifically, I know, with the pandemic, there's been a lot of conversation around the impact on children and access to education, and, even having environments in which they can learn and learn safely. And specifically, as we know here, girls education is a global problem. So many girls don't have access to education, or they leave school at an early age. And then now, when you layer on a pandemic on top of that, what are you seeing? And are there things that we individually can do to support girls more during this time?
So Tammy mentioned that stat of 130 girls all around the world being out of school. That stat, unfortunately, is a pre-COVID stat. And what the Malala Fund is now estimating is that there are 20 million more girls who are not going to go back to school after this pandemic is over, and when schools are back to kind of a quote unquote normal. And we know that this is for a few reasons. Anytime girls are cut off from school and from support systems, and anytime there's economic pressure on families that are living in poverty, we see risk factors for girls go up. So in other words, when a family is struggling financially, that is when they are most likely to marry off a daughter at an early age to make sure that she has financial security. She has someone else to make sure that she's getting access to food. That's when early childhood pregnancy is most rampant when teenage girls are getting pregnant at higher rates, either because they're engaging in transactional sex or because the rest of the family is working. We see increased rates of child labor as well because girls are trying to help take care of the family. And so all of these factors are combined when it comes to a pandemic because girls are cut off from school. And because of the job situation and the fact that many people, they can't go to work, they aren't able to engage in a market economy, families are under a lot of financial stress and a lot of financial pressure. So we are already seeing an increase anecdotally in child marriage. We are seeing, even statistically, but certainly anecdotally, an increase in teenage pregnancy as well. So what we've been looking at with our partners are ways that we can help to stop and prevent a lot of these issues impacting girls. And what we found is that one effective way of doing that is by providing care packages to families that include the basics. So your food, your water, your menstrual hygiene supplies, the types of supplies that really mean the difference between survival for a lot of families around the world. And that takes some of the financial pressure off of families because they know that they have, the food and the water to make it through. We've also seen that, of course, getting girls educational materials is incredibly important. But the piece that we really haven't started to talk about yet is that prior to the pandemic, we really treated technology and access to technology as a luxury. So girls who had access to smartphones, to computers, to tablets, that was just something that we considered a nice to have. And what we've seen in the pandemic is that it's actually critical to have because that is how girls can maintain their support networks, access their classes, access education. And so one of the things I think you can look out for if you're a person who is really interested in creating impact for girls around the world is first look to those organizations that are working holistically to protect girls and to ensure that they are surviving and thriving. So they're not just looking to make sure she has access to books, for example, but that she really has a whole slew of support systems at her fingertips. And second would be, a lot of times as donors, we think about things like technology as a nice to have. And what we've seen through this pandemic, I would just encourage all of us to think about, engaging with the programs that do bring technology into the mix with and for girls, because we're seeing it create a large difference for them.
Thank you for that. I personally, and many of the conversations I have had over the past couple of months is around what can we do? We've seen so many of the inequities and inequalities really, front and center. And many of us are assessing our own privilege and access to resources and ways that we can show up for others, take action and do more. And we're here today to talk about your book, Impact, a Step-by-Step Plan to Create the World You Want to Live in. And I think the timing here is so appropriate because, as we're having these thoughts, what can I do? Or how do I not just show up today, but show up every single day? What is my legacy or my impact? Not all of us have a framework for that. It's hard to understand what that looks like and how you really tap into that potential. So I'm excited to delve into this book more. I'm curious, what was that moment, Tammy, when you and Christen, were you just sitting there one day and you're like, oh, we know so much about this and let's just write a book about it? I mean, what was that catalyst that got you to publishing this guide?
I'm so glad that you asked that. Well, over the years, Christen and I would joke when we went through a challenging experience or one that was beyond our wildest dreams. We would be like, this is going to be in our book someday. And we started a Google Doc where we would just write funny chapter titles. That is a book that more inside stories that aren't actually, Impact is much more useful. It was around the 10th anniversary of She's the First was coming up. And I think when you face that kind of a milestone, you do a lot of reflection on what you have accomplished as an organization, as an individual leader. What have you learned? And we really wanted to share that with everyone, not just She's the First supporters. And over the years, so many people from the She's the First community, or just friends of friends who would meet at a cocktail party, they would hear about our work and they would ask, what can I do to make a difference? How can I help? And we can only answer so many people. We only have so much time to sit down and meet up with people for coffee or Zooms now to advise them. So it just made so much sense to us to write a book that we could hand over to others, that they could read and walk themselves and go on this journey of figuring out, number one, what is the issue area that they care about most, that most intimately ties to their own lived experience. Two, how do they figure out all that they have to offer? Because the truth is, at least in my experience, I think most people underestimate what they have, because it is way more than just money. And then three, how do they go out into the world and find impact partners, nonprofit organizations, mutual aid groups, political candidates, change makers that they can then offer those resources to, and figure out that perfect sweet spot between the gifts that they have and what the world needs. That's where you get started. And then, of course, through the book, it was also an opportunity for us to dive into the more sticky subjects of how you create change in an ethical way. How do you create change in a sustainable way? Because the work, while it is extremely gratifying and fulfilling, does get daunting at times. And you don't want to burn out. You have to build your own resilience. So we take a reader through that whole process of making an actual impact plan, of writing down the specific goals they have to contribute to something that is bigger than themselves. And then strategies to really question that they're doing that in the most responsible way, and encouragement to keep it up over the long term.
So this sounds like an amazing resource. I'm curious, the first step here you talked about, what are you passionate about? Like, what do you want to change? What do you care about? And I think many of us, there's so many things, right? I mean, you could say, I care about, gender equality, or I care about the environment. And those seem like really broad areas to tackle. Like, do you need to break that down to like a very specific pillar within that? I care about access to education, or I care about, clean water. Is it necessary to go through the process of really clearly articulating and defining what is that impact you want to have, and how would you go about that?
So the way we think about this, Kristy, is defining what your North Star is. And that is step one of the process. It acknowledges that we all care about many different issues. And that's a good thing, that we have big hearts. And certainly many issues, they intersect. They don't exist in silos. So rather than kind of get overwhelmed by all that you care about, we ask you to start reflecting on what in your own life has shaped who you are today. And that could be positive influences, it could be negative ones. In my life, I grew up with the privilege of having a stable family life, a good public school education. And the one thing that really held me back, though, was my own shyness. And I had a very low self-esteem, as many teenage girls do, up to the point that when I graduated from high school, I was voted most shy in my high school yearbook. And that was a moment for me, like a wake-up call of I didn't want to go through life just kind of hanging scared on the sidelines, that I wanted to be able to use my voice to tell the stories of other women, to amplify their voices. So that's where I started to find my purpose and connect. As Christen mentioned, we met through a scholarship program. We were first-generation college students. I was connecting the dots between my educational opportunities, my access to mentors, and how this enabled me to overcome this shyness, this crippling shyness I had as a kid. So I draw on that when I go out into the world, and the issues that I care about She's the First, being a big one, my involvement in my alma mater, the College of New Jersey, is another, are really defined by ensuring that girls and women have the opportunities and the resources to unlock their dreams in the way that I have been able to do. So the North Star, to remember it in a very simple way, is if I were to say, you want to live in a world where blank, what would you fill that blank with? And that is an outcome that you can work towards. We believe that, just because it might seem, a world where gender equality exists might seem like a utopia to some people or too far-fetched, but you really truly have to believe that it is possible. And because the vision of what that looks like is going to ultimately pull you forward, and enable you to identify what impact partners and organizations are out there that share that vision. So that's just one tactic you can use, is reflecting on your own experience. Another way is to just notice when you're listening to the news and reading the newspaper, what gets you angry. Part of the story of how Christen and I connected, yes, I did post on Facebook that I had this idea for a social media campaign called She's the First, but it was really incited by a news article I had read that was blaming girls in Liberia for becoming pregnant, and not blaming boys at all, just the girls, not acknowledging that they weren't given any sex ed in school. So that's something to keep in mind too, both where do you want to pay it forward based on the opportunities you've had in life, but also where are you just angry, and let that anger fuel you to take action.
It's so well put, Tammy. And yeah, it's like, I always love to say, like, what keeps you up at night, what gets you out of bed in the morning. It's kind of those emotions and that can motivate us, to take action. But when we hit on that, okay, this is what I want to change or impact, Christen, like, what are the next steps there? And I ask that in the sense that, you, Tammy, initially were thinking of this social media campaign. It turned into this amazing nonprofit organization. There's political advocacy and changing that. There's things that are more on a local level versus a global level. And I know I'm kind of making it overly complicated out of the gate, but I think that's something that oftentimes holds us back, which is, I care about this. Now what? What do I do? How do I know the next step? And Christen, I'm curious what your thoughts are on how we can, identify the work that needs to be done and what that means for us.
Yeah, and I don't think you are overcomplicating it. I think actually the reason that people have such a hard time getting started with impact work is because it feels so incredibly overwhelming. Right? There are so many different ways to give back. There are so many different categories of ways to give back. And sometimes it feels like, well, I'm not going to go out and start a nonprofit. Like, I don't have that in me. And there are too many other things to choose from. And so you freeze and you're not sure where to go next. And that's why we created the Impact Plan framework, honestly, because in order to create real change over the course of your life, it doesn't do anyone any good if you freeze up and you feel shame and you feel guilty that you're not doing enough. And it doesn't do anyone any good if you run into it full steam ahead and you burn yourself out after 6 months of doing activist work for something you care about. Right. And those are the two scenarios that are really, really common. People feel overwhelmed and they freeze, or they go all in and they burn out quickly. And so we wanted to create a framework that would allow you to pace yourself and to give you the grace to be able to say no when things don't work for you. And so what that looks like is we suggest that you break up your impact work into 3 different categories. Think about what your biggest goal might be. And this might be something that you're working toward over the course of a year or 2 years or 5 years. This might be, I want to run a marathon for an organization I care about. Or it might be, I want to sit on a board for an organization that matters a lot to me. Or even I want to host a concert event as a fundraiser. Something that you've always really wanted to do, but that it's going to take a lot of work to get to. And then from there, you look at, choose maybe 6 to 8 things that would fall into a medium effort category. So what are the things that you want to do on a pretty regular basis that feed into your North Star, but aren't taking all of your time or all of your energy? It's something that's more manageable that you can work into your life. So that might be something like committing to volunteering once a week or committing to voting. You can kind of pick and choose from different categories and lay them out there. And then finally, picking just maybe 5 things that you want to work into your everyday life. Maybe that's a small recurring donation. Maybe that's using, reusable straws, or committing to eating less meat, or something that doesn't feel like it takes a lot of work for you, but that you can do on a regular basis. And what that does is when you have it all laid out in front of you and you have this plan, then you can work towards something and it's really clear what your goals are. And after 6 months or after a year, you can take a look at it and you can say, here are some things I did really well. And these ones that I didn't, I'm going to replace them with something that works better for me. Because again, the goal isn't to force yourself to create a whole new set of habits. The goal is to sustain yourself in creating positive change, because it's something that's going to make you feel good. It's going to make the community around you better. And so the goal is to create a plan so that you feel supported and you feel organized and you feel ready to tackle it, and not so that you feel ashamed or you feel guilty. It has to work for you.
That's such great advice, because we talk about having an impact, and in the way that you, Tammy and Christen, are talking about it, it's becomes that habit, that thing you do all the time that's part of your life, that becomes so deeply ingrained. And to do it, it has to matter. It has to feel manageable. And I think it has to be something, that becomes part of our everyday life. And that is where, we see that type of systemic change that's going to not, feel like one off, but just feel like, okay, like I'm Kristy and I care about X, and this is what I do every day to make that happen. You mentioned in the book, Tammy, about partnerships. And as someone who leads an organization that has, a very strong mission, and there's many other organizations, amazing companies out there now that are also really focused on similar work around how we drive equality, particularly equality in the workplace, and more specifically for women, and then going down into intersectionality there. Partnerships can be tricky to navigate because, everyone has their, certain resources and certain goals that they're trying to hit, or ways that they're having that impact. But I've seen firsthand the power of partnerships in really accelerating and amplifying the change you seek. So do you have advice, Tammy, for, how do we look at partnerships? How do you approach that? How have you seen that work with She's the First? What can we all think about if you're, an individual or running a company or part of an organization that has, the resources to partner with nonprofits or community-based organizations? Like, I want us to be thinking about ways that we can each engage in partnerships that help accelerate this progress.
Yeah, this is such a good question. And I think Christen and I can both answer it from a different lens. So first, I'll answer it from more of the business perspective, and then she can tell you kind of from a programs perspective how we approach partnerships that I think would be inspiring to a lot of people. So first, in terms of you as a donor or you as a company looking to partner with change makers, it is so important. Like, we believe in making your impact pitch, like putting it all on the table of what specifically do you have to offer, because then that organization, that change maker, they can very quickly calibrate that with their needs and tell you where you fit in. So if you are a company that's able to make a financial commitment if you can lay out what that is and be really clear whether it's just a one-off gift or if you have the means to make it a quarterly contribution or a monthly contribution, that's really helpful for an organization to know, because as any good business person would know, having an idea of what your future income is going to be helps you make better decisions. If you can offer pro bono services, can you get really specific about that scope so that the organization's not giving you too much to do, and you can ensure that both parties are happy with the end result? So number one is really just transparency and making it really clear what you're willing to offer, or any needs you have as well, and any limitations or expectations you have of what you need to receive in return so that it's a mutually beneficial relationship. Christen, shall I toss it to you to talk more from the anti-oppressive approach?
Yeah. So the second thing that we think about when we're looking at our own partnerships as an organization, but I think there are lessons here for us as individuals as well, is that we look to match up our core values with whoever we're partnering with. And for us, there are two. The first is that we take an anti-oppressive approach to building relationships. And that's because we're aware that as a large international organization, we hold a certain amount of power. And having most of our staff based in New York, and there are a lot of power dynamics that happen within the aid world and the nonprofit world that we want to be aware of when we're working with other activists and organizations all around the world. Our second core value is a girl-centered approach. So in any and all of our partnerships or our organizational relationships, that value means that the girls come before everything else. The girls come before ego, girls come before, benefits of the relationship. It has to be at the center. And I think when you're thinking as an individual or as a donor, how do I match up with an organization? In addition to all of the tips Tammy just gave, I think you can think about what organizations share my core values. It's another way of thinking about your North Star as leading the way. Because if you find an organization or a movement or an activist that shares your core values about how the world should look and how we can get there, then everything else, their metrics, their data, all of that is honestly, it's going to fall in place. The biggest key that we have found in making partnerships work on an organizational and a personal level is that concept of shared core values.
And that's so key to us at Ellevate as well. And, you find that when you identify those values and, everyone is behind them and understands them, then it dictates, how you approach your work, how you approach partnerships, how you approach the impact. It gives you that lens with which to view things. And I think that's really important. I mean, we have that on an individual level, but internalizing that on more of a corporate level can be really beneficial in giving you that gut check, and some of those guardrails to make sure that you're really leading in the way that you want to. Tammy, how do we find this book? Where should we get it? Tell us more. And I'm eager I cannot wait to get my hands on a copy. And I know our listeners feel the same way.
Yes, well, visit planyouриmpact.com and we link out there, but bookshop.org is a favorite of ours. Going to your local bookstore in your community is great, but it's everywhere that books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all of that. And also on our website, if you sign up for our mailing list, you can download some bonus worksheets and discussion guides.
And Christen, if we were to come back together a year from now, what is the impact that you hope to have seen from this book? What impact, this titled impact, this step-by-step guide, giving everyone, our listeners and readers that framework with which to accelerate their impact. But what do you envision your impact through creating this to be?
I hope that everyone who reads this book walks away with the mantra that no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. and that they can really embody that and approach impact work not from a place of guilt or overwhelm or shame, but out of a sense of possibility and opportunity, and recognizing that everyone has something unique to give to create a better world around us all, and that you should do it. You should give it a shot and give it a try.
Excellent. Well, Tammy and Christen, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you, but also to be inspired and energized by the impact you're having, and to learn from your learnings so that we can all continue to have the important impact that we know is needed in this world now and into the future. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristy.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes, give us 5 stars, and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Ellevate NTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.
92% of households that start the year with Peloton are still active a year later.
92% because of a bike?
Not just bikes. We also make treadmills and rowers.
Oh, let me guess, for elite athletes only, right?
Nope. It doesn't matter if you're an avid exerciser or new to working out. Peloton can help you achieve your fitness goals. 92% stick with it. So can you. Try Peloton bikes, tread, or row risk-free with a 30-day home trial. New members only. Not available in remote locations. See additional terms at onepeloton.com/home-trial.